Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, counterplan competition. First thing that I want to outline here is the case for getting good at it, or why learning counterplan competition I think is worth your time. Even if you are a 2A or a 2N that loathes process counterplans and thinks that they're beneath you, you can't answer arguments you don't understand. You're going to end up in competition debates no matter what. Mastering competition will enable you to succeed in those debates, irrespective of whether you're defending process on theoretical grounds or answering it. Um, Process counterplans are also the neg's Swiss Army knife. They disagree with anything that starts with the United States federal government should. So they're universally useful. Um, and they're also your ace in the hole versus weird AFs, new AFs, anything in which your traditional DAs don't line up. Um, the fact that we are on a topic where the neg gets mountains of DAs, I don't really think changes this calculus. So I've got two screenshots here of finals on topics that people thought were too small to need process. Never trust a small topic, right? Most of the normative arguments in favor of process competition are actually agnostic to the size of the topic. And you're going to want something in the holster for when somebody breaks a new AF and your DAs don't make sense against it. Okay, this is like an incomplete agenda. Competition 101. Counterplans rejoin the AF because they present an opportunity cost. They are formalized statements that there's some preferable alternative to the plan. When we talk about competition, what we really mean is testing whether the counter plan presents a true opportunity cost, whether doing the plan trades off with something of value. Okay, competition is a two-step process. A counter plan competes if it's less than the plan and it derives a net benefit from that omission that would be precluded by including the plan. So counter plans that don't omit anything, like for example, if they merely add something to the plan, that fails prong one. So counterplan do the off and solve world hunger. Counterplans that are distinct from the plan but don't have a net benefit that has anything to do with that exclusion fails prong two. I'm using the language of less than the plan rather than distinct from the plan because something can be distinct from the plan, right? It could be the plan and something else. But what's important is that it excludes something, that it isn't what we would call plan plus. Okay, permutations combine the plan with some or all of the counterplan. Their purpose is to test competition. Permutations have to be theoretically legitimate and substantively successful. And here's what I mean by both of those. So to succeed theoretically, a permutation has to contain the entire plan. It also have to include all or some of the counterplan and nothing more. The term for a permutation that does not include the entire plan is severance. That's the name of that phenomenon. And then including something that is in neither the plan nor the counterplan is intrinsic. And intrinsic permutations are usually rejected on just normative theoretical grounds, which is that if the AF can shoehorn in something that's not in the plan or the counterplan, then as soon as the neg introduces any counterplan, the AF would have infinite ways of solving it. Like, do the plan plus here's a billion policies to solve your net benefit that are totally unrelated to the topic. And then they have to succeed substantively. There is no utility to a permutation that does not solve the net benefit. And the combination of the plan and the counterplan need to not linked to a distinct DA. So the neg could read a DA to combining the plan with the counterplan, and then that would cause the permutation to fail on substantive rather than theoretical grounds. Okay. Examples. I should go to a grocery store at 2. Counterplan, I should go to Costco at 2. Does this compete? What do we think? Does anyone think it does compete? Okay. What do you think it does compete? If what? Yeah, so if you construe a term in the plain text that excludes the counterplan, it is possible. I would say this does not compete because it merely specifies a way that the plan could be done. The 1AC contained an ambiguous statement. It's possible that ambiguous statement could be construed in a way that includes the counterplan. So the counterplan is a permissible reading of the plain text. What's the perm here? What perm should the AF say? Yeah. Do the counterplan. Correct. Okay. Grocery store at 2. Counterplan, I should go at 4. I should get coffee with John Marshall at 2. Does this compete? What do we think? We got some yeses. It is less than the plan, and it derives its net benefit from that distinction. So you might hear the phrase picks out. It omits the temporal constraint that is in the plan text. Okay. Another one. Grocery store at 2. My counterplan is that Bricker should do it all for me. My net benefit is that I save the time that I would have spent at the grocery store. Does this compete? Almost certainly. Substitutes the agent, and the net benefit comes from this substitution. So it's certainly possible to say perm do both. Just wouldn't solve the net benefit. Okay. Plan lift weights on Monday. Plan do that and play tennis on Tuesday. Does this compete? We got some no's. It does not compete because it adds tennis rather than omitting anything. What's the permutation? Yeah. Sure. That is true. Or you could say do the counterplan because it contains the entirety of the plan text. Okay. Does this compete? I should eat dinner at 6. I should eat breakfast at 8. I should not eat dinner at 6. What do we think? Vote in your head. Competes yes, competes no. We've got some mixed opinions here. Who thinks this counterplan does compete? I saw people. Anyone? Yeah. What, Parker? Why do you think it competes? It excludes the plan. That's true. It explicitly forbids the plan, in fact. Yeah. Correct. So on face, this looks like a yes, right? Like I should not eat dinner at 6. I mean, prong 1 is satisfied, right? But the net benefit is just breakfast is good. And that's true regardless of whether I skip dinner. So excluding the plan has no utility, and there's a permutation that solves it. What's the perm? Yeah. Okay. Types of competition. One of the things that we've discussed is it's ambiguous what counts as less than the plan. Is omitting a word less than the plan? What if you took the entire plan text and you added a word to it in a way that made a function, um, or in a way that removed a function from the initial plan text? Okay. Functional competition says counterplans should compete if they omit a function of the plan and they derive their net benefit from this omission. Does anyone know what a function is? Yeah, a function's a mandate of the plan. That's right. It's something that the plan directs to happen. Okay, what are some examples of functions? Agent who does the plan, that's a function. The substance of the policy, single payer, that's a function. The funding mechanism, whether it comes from taxes or something else, that's a function. These are all things that the plan directs to happen. Functional competition is what governs like 95% of counterplans. And then notice functional competition allows a counterplan to contain the entire plan text, so long as that counterplan adds a word that removes a function. Can anyone think of an example of adding a word that would remove a function? Yeah. What's that? Okay, arguably. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the clearest example of this is the United States federal government should not, and then you insert the entire rest of the plain text. You're adding a word, right? But the function is clearly distinct. The function is plan minus. Okay. Subtypes of functional competition. These are additional specifications. So positional competition was outlined by a paper by Dr. Bricker. And it argues that characterizations of the plan in the 1AC or positions should be construed as binding amendments to the plan text. For example, if you and cross-X say the plan has Congress establish national health insurance, that's a binding amendment to the plan. Tags, so if your tag says single payer, even if your plan contains a more vague term, that's what your plan does for the purposes of competition. Um, Positional competition, you have probably heard described in negative terms, like plan text in a vacuum is good because it avoids the downsides of positional competition. What are some of the problems with positional competition? Yeah, yeah. So it's not obvious what counts as a position. Um, One like classic example is like, what if there's one line of your evidence in an impact card? Like, is that sufficient to establish the AFS agent? Also, what happens if two of these positions seem to conflict? Like, what if you've got an impact card that says Congress, but your solvency advocate says courts? Yeah. Yeah, so it creates a huge penalty for any degree of specificity in the 1AC. That's true. Because then you're making a bunch of things competitive. Yeah. Okay, so I don't like cross-X doesn't matter, but in fact, to the contrary, positional competition is by far strongest when the AF explicitly says something in cross-X. I think positional competition is perfectly acceptable when it's applied to cross-X specifically. Cross-X is special. If the AF takes an unambiguous commitment in cross-X, then I don't know. I actually think that's quite defensible. But yeah, some judges don't flow cross-X. Okay, resolutional competition. This says the neg is allowed to derive competition from phrases that are in the resolution but not in the plan. The justification for this is actually really simple. If the resolution says something, you have to do it or your AF isn't topical. Pros and cons of resolutional competition. Anything come to mind? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the AF has to prove an instance of the resolution true. Yeah, so they have the burden of proof. Anything else? Yeah. Um, it encourages those or discourages them. Okay, so it encourages the AF to like be more topical or maybe. Yeah. Um, okay, so you think this is a downside? I'm a little confused. Is this a downside? The downside direct well, resolutional competition means that there's it's actually much less of an incentive to just repeat the resolution in your plan text because those things are all going to compete anyway. Yeah. Yeah. So that I think this is what I'm looking for the downside of competition should be based on resolution and not plan, is that it might include the offsets counter plan, which on this topic does not make a whole lot of sense. But if you read a subset affirmative and the neg had a counter plan to ban national health insurance and also do the plan, they could argue that that disagrees with the resolution because it's a net decrease in American national health insurance, but it would literally do the plan. Okay. So, in terms of defining what a function is, clear fiated mandate of the plan. Like the plan text says single payer, the neg gets competition off of single payer. That unambiguously counts as a function. There's two gray areas of like resolutional mandates or maybe positions taken in tags of the 1AC or taken by the solvency advocate. And then there's something that I think everyone can agree is not a function of the plan, which is a downstream effect of the plan rather than a mandate. What's the difference between those two things? Effect, not mandate. Yeah. Yeah. One of them is just the thing that the plan directs the government to do, and everything else is a second order effect. That is not a function of the plan. Okay. A lot of the time, knowing what is a function of the plan will require both teams to read definitions. If you are ever in a debate in which two teams are reading a dictionary at each other, they are disagreeing about whether the counterplan is functionally competitive. So if you want to say the counterplan does not compete functionally, this is how you do it. Definitions. Have these ready to go. Okay. We're next going to talk about functionally competitive process counterplans. So one thing that I want you all to come away with is that there is a difference between a counterplan that does not fiat anything that could reasonably be construed as the plan and a counterplan that fiats adoption of the plan if certain circumstances are met, like uncertain fiat. Um, so on the left is like Michigan's beloved. And then the right is like Pipkin style. So mandates competition is almost not a competition style and more of a competition framing device. So if you're reading this counterplan, you're saying the counterplan only creates conditions that make the plan more likely. But the judge should only evaluate what the counterplan directly fiats for determining competition. In other words, its function. And what the counterplan fiats is not the plan. So on the right is the probability scheme, and this type of counterplan does fiat the plan, but only if a particular condition is met, and it artificially shrinks the AF's ability to argue say no to those conditions. So these come with a distinct profile of strengths and weaknesses. A lot of probability schemes are just impossible to answer functionally, or substantively rather, because the neg will just argue there's a 99.9% chance that they do the plan. And they'll limit the say no to condition to being like, does the plan cause extinction? Or does it cause an immediate environmental crisis? I think do the counterplan should be your bread and butter versus a probability scheme. Mandates competition perm do the counterplan has almost no utility, or it has a lot less. Okay. Example. I should buy a coffee from the cafe. Check out this counterplan. The United States federal government should drone strike me if I don't get a coffee from the cafe. What type of functional process competition is this? Yeah. Yeah, this is mandates competition. So it doesn't fiat that I go pick up the coffee. It merely makes it very likely that I do. I technically retain discretion not to go. Solvency is downstream. It is based on effect. Okay. I should roll 2 dice, and if they're both 6s, I should go to the cafe. Does this compete? How does this compete? Correct. Yeah, this is certainty immediacy. Solvency is not purely by effect because the counterplan retains the option of mandating that the plan becomes law. And say no is artificially limited. I can't say that I won't go to the coffee or go to the cafe for political reasons or because I would rather do something else. Okay, that's functional. Next, I'm going to talk about textual competition. Textual competition says that counterplans should compete if they omit words from the plan and they derive a net benefit from this omission or from this exclusion. Textual competition allows counterplans to compete if the thing they direct the government to do is substantively identical, so long as it is phrased in different language. Okay, so I want you all to see whether these counterplans compete textually or functionally or both. Okay, plan one single payer, counterplan taxes pick. Do all of the plan but omit the tax financed component. Does this compete textually, functionally, or both? Yeah? Correct. Yeah. This is both. It competes functionally because the mandate is different. And it competes textually because it omits a phrase from the plan. Okay. Example 2, pick out of the word national. Yeah. This competes textually. They both mandate the same functions. The counterplan does everything the off does. It just packages it in different language. Okay. Adds the word not. Wow, this is annoying. Okay. Is this one textual, functional? Both, neither? Yeah. Functional? Correct. Yeah. It merely adds a word to the plan, so it does not compete textually, but it does compete functionally. It does something different. Okay. Textual cares about the words in the plan. Functional cares about the mandates that those words create. A counterplan can satisfy one of these standards. It can satisfy both or neither. Questions thus far about functional, types of functional, or textual competition? Okay. So other premise, competition governs permutations. Remember how perms are how we figure out whether a counterplan competes. So whether the perm is theoretically illegitimate can be governed by textual or functional rules. So a perm can be textually intrinsic, can be textual severance. Similarly, can be functional severance or functionally intrinsic. Okay. Textual competition says perms have to be textually legitimate. So perms cannot textually sever or be textually intrinsic. a counterplan or a perm has to include all the words that are in the plan, and no permutation is allowed to add new language not found in the plan or the counterplan. Okay, functional competition says perms have to be functionally legitimate. They can't exclude a mandate of the plan, and they can't include a mandate in neither the plan nor the counterplan. Now, some permutations are intrinsic under both standards. If the AF said single payer, the neg said counterplan have the states do single payer, and the AF said perm, plan, counterplan, and also adopt a carbon tax, that is both textually and functionally intrinsic. Similarly, if the AF were to say perm do the counterplan, that would be both functional and textual severance. So if the AF either severs under both standards or reads a perm that is intrinsic under both standards, you don't really need to dig into the weeds of discussing whether it is functionally intrinsic, whether it is textually intrinsic. You can use generic language to describe it. This perm is intrinsic because. Okay, textual competition says functional intrinsicness is okay because competition is based on text. Functional competition says textual intrinsicness is acceptable. Because the locus of competition should be function. Questions about this? Okay. What if counterplans have to compete both functionally and textually? Well, that means a perm only needs to pass one test. Because then it's not competing both functionally and textually, it's only competing via one avenue. Okay. So we're now going to get into permutations that the AF might deploy that are functionally intrinsic but textually legitimate. This is a very popular model. So here's how you craft a permutation, and this is often called the other issues perm. The template is you have the entire plan text, and you might just write shorthand for it, like you might just say plan plus. And then you insert the counterplan text with words struck through to make it more vague or change its mandate in a way that solves the net benefit. It typically applies the counterplan to something else. Okay. So I've got an example of a permutation here. First question, does this perm sever? Does it sever? It does not sever. It contains the entirety of the plan text. It's the first sentence there. Is there a standard of competition that this perm violates? Yeah, exactly right. This is functionally illegitimate. Is there a standard of competition that this perm satisfies? Is it legitimate under any model? Yeah. This is textually legitimate. Every word in this permutation comes directly from the counterplan. And it also doesn't sever, because it includes the entire plan. But this is functionally intrinsic, because it changes the mandate of the counterplan. You're doing the counterplan, but without the temporal constraint. So you're removing a specification. You're making the counterplan more vague or more broad in a way that means there is no longer a trade-off between doing the plan and the counterplan. Okay. Grocery store at 2. Counterplan, ban leaving my house. Net benefit, I could go to a convenience store, I could buy energy drinks, possibly suffer a heart attack. Okay, permutation. Does this perm sever? Does not sever. Is this perm intrinsic? Intrinsic under one standard, both standards? Yeah. Avi, what do you think? You think it's intrinsic under both? So it's definitely textually intrinsic. Also notice it adds 7-Eleven. And do you think it's functionally intrinsic or no? Sorry, you think it is or not? Okay. So I think this perm is functionally legitimate within the mandate of never leave your house. The mandate of never go to 7-Eleven is contained within there, right? So this counterplan includes a spectrum of mandates. Don't go to the park, right? Don't go to the grocery store. Don't go to 7-Eleven. Think of this counterplan tacitly as like having a list of places that you are banned from going. This permutation preserves that mandate. It just narrows it. It shrinks the mandate. So it includes not all of the counterplan, but some of the counterplan. It is textually intrinsic because it adds new language that is not in the plan or the counterplan's text. Okay, functional competition says this perm is allowed. Textual competition says this perm is not allowed. If it's functional and textual, what would that model of competition have to say about this perm? Give me thumbs up or thumbs down. That is correct. Functional and textual competition says this perm is permissible because it satisfies one of the standards. Okay. I should go to the cafe. Counterplan, I should go to 7-Eleven. Going to 7-Eleven is good. Permutation, do both. Functionally intrinsic? Yes or no? Textually intrinsic? No? This one passes both legitimacy tests. Okay, what about do the counterplan? Is it functionally legitimate? No. Why is it functionally illegitimate? Yeah. Severs the plan, correct. Is it textually legitimate? Is it textually legitimate? This one's easy. It is not textually legitimate. So this perm fails both legitimacy tests. If you're in a situation like this, you should just call the perm severance. Like, you don't need to dig into the weeds of textual functional competition, because it doesn't matter what standard you're using to govern permutations. Okay. Table. So this kind of lays out the differences here. This is like your map. Do we have questions about functional textual? Okay. Next subsection is debating models of competition. This one has its own agenda. Okay, the case for text and function. So all standards for process counterplans are bad will apply here. Why do we think this is the case? Process counterplans bad. Why is that a reason to prefer text and function competition? Because it's not super obvious immediately. Yeah.
A lot of firms that are functioning so that process counterplans that have non-germane net benefits are solved by excluding the part of the counterplan that reduces.
Yeah, so if you are allowed to strike through words in the counterplan's text to craft a permutation, process counterplans become much weaker because you can craft a permutation that applies the mandate of the counterplan to something else. If you are allowed to do that, then the net benefit must be pertinent to the plan. In order for that permutation to not solve your net benefit, you need to have written a process net benefit that is about national health insurance. It can't just be about insurance, much less about any policy. Okay. Have any of you heard other justifications for text and function beyond the reasons for process counterplans bad and germaneness? Yeah.
Including access standard more effective because the definitions of words are kind of progressive and non-verifiable.
Yeah, so this is one of the general justifications for textual competition. I don't think this is a justification for textual and functional competition because the AF can go for the counterplan is not functionally competitive. This creates the same ambiguity. Does that make sense? So the advantages to functional competition alone and the advantages to textual competition alone do not necessarily apply to text and function. Text and function actually has all of the disadvantages of both textual and functional competition because you're allowed to test both. Okay, function alone. So if you tested a counterplan via both text and function, then what happens to counterplan don't do the plan? It becomes non-competitive. Okay, logic. Who cares? Why is this an impact? Yeah, yeah. The logic paradox. You can't conclude other things matter more without using logic. It's kind of the backbone of reasoning. If logic doesn't matter, vote neg for no reason. Anything else? The internal link or the impact? So this is like the impact to logic, and it's comparable to like the fairness paradox. You can't conclude logic matters less than other things without using logic, or you can't conclude it doesn't matter without employing logic. So all steps of reasoning depend on logic. So defense to logic is self-refuting. It relies on logic to make its case. And in doing so, it proves that logic is important. Did you have a question? Or oh, this is an impact to logic. Yeah. This is it's not an answer, it's agreeing with it. It's an impact to the standard. Okay, scramble perms. So if you are allowed to play obscene word games by striking through words, you are probably also allowed to change the order of the text in the counterplan. But that is a controversy. Are you allowed to change the order of words under textual competition? Not just omissions? What do you think? What are your opinions on this? Yeah, yeah, that's true. So if you are defending functional and textual competition, you should say, under our model of functional textual, you are not allowed to rearrange words in the counterplan's text or in the plan text. I do not think that this model is compatible with the assumptions of textual competition. Textual competition says the meaning of words does not matter. It's only their presence that matters. Okay, this is a similar theme, but functional severance. If you read a counterplan that says the United States federal government should not first strike China, under textual and functional, what exactly stops the AF from taking the word not in that counterplan and stuffing it in the plan text to produce permutation ban our plan? Because that would solve the net benefit. It would destroy it. Like the net benefit could be like, midterms, right? I mean, permutation, do the plan and or permutation, do the opposite of the plan would certainly solve the net benefit. Okay. Process counterplan's good. This is an impact churn. The AF is saying our model allows us to weed out process counterplans. You can disagree that that's a good thing. And then my last thing, functional competition is not a blank check for process counterplans. Um, And if you are good at defending functional competition, you can absolutely win, that it actually excludes the worst case examples. So counterplan, consult AI about whether the app is a good idea and adopt the results of the recommendation. What type of functional process competition is that? We discussed it earlier. Yeah. Certainty. Yeah. So that's certainty immediacy competition. If your counterplan is mandates competition, you should absolutely say this: functional competition does not by itself make the worst case scenarios competitive. All this makes sense? Questions about the case for function alone? Yeah. Whoa, whoa. Sorry. What was your question? They are using the same example. Functional severance is more like you cause the AF or you enable the AF to sever the plan even when unintended, because the neg can borrow the word not from a totally unrelated plank. So it's like, the United States federal government should not first strike China. Permutation, just take that word, apply it to the plan, perm ban the plan. Yeah. Oh, that's coming. That's the secret sixth option. Yeah. So full words, I think I'm down with, right? Like I don't think that textual competition allows you to strike through letters, individual letters in the counter plan. But I don't really think that like you can't scramble the words in the counter plan text. I mean, for one, I don't think that totally solves scramble perms or functional severance perms, because I'm about to display a couple of examples that don't rearrange. But I also think that's like arbitrary and not compatible with like the basic assumptions of textual competition. Like that's just a gerrymandered interpretation that's like just added to solve process counterplans. A foundational assumption of textual competition: the meaning of words does not matter. Only evaluate the presence of words. Saying that you're not allowed to scramble words in a way that changes their meaning conflicts with the premise of textual competition. Yeah. Okay, I need you to say that question again. So like, what's the AF answer to this standard that's other than just gerrymandering your interp? Um, there's a couple of things that you have in the toolbox. These permutations in like regular debate are virtually non-existent. Like, so you can say empirically denied. Like our model of competition is held for process counter plans generally, but these perms like don't really show up very much. Time constraints, like the 2AC is always very time pressured. They have to use prep time to come up with like crafty permutations. So there is like a functional ceiling on this argument. Now, on the AF's ability to make scramble perms, I don't think either of those arguments are persuasive. Empirically denied is mostly just like judges think functional competition is real. Like they hold functional competition as a default paradigm. Um, and the other thing is time constraints, which is just like you're just underestimating the craftiness of 2As. Yeah, I think the case for functional competition is strong. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. If the neg is introducing the argument that theory solves process, then theory solves scramble perm seems, yeah, that seems compelling to me. Yeah, I think you should say that they're not included under functional competition. Okay. So this like scramble perms concept is a little bit abstract. So got some examples. Plan national health insurance, counterplan medical moon base. Permutation, do the plan, but only on the moon. Is this perm textually legitimate? Is it textual severance first? No. Is it textually intrinsic? No, it's not. Is it functionally legitimate? No, it's functional severance. Okay. Plan NHI, counterplan prohibit private health insurance, perm penalize anyone who attempts to do the plan. This is another example of functional severance that is textually legitimate. If the AF were to say, okay, our interpretation is that you can't rearrange words in the counterplan text, would that permit or include permutations like these? Anyone have an answer? Interp, you can't change the order of words. Does that include or exclude this? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think it's kind of ambiguous. Um, because you're not rearranging the order of words in the counterplan. All you're doing is adding a word to the plan. So you're not taking words from the counterplan and then shifting the order. You're just inserting one word. Yeah. I mean, that's arguable. Yeah. I don't think so because it's merely adding words to the plan. Right. Well, I mean, would that mean that you could only add words to the end of the plan? Because if so, this example still obtains. Does it mean you can't add words to the plan at all? If so, then a lot of the foundational premises of textual competition have been defeated. Okay. Does everyone understand this permutation is functionally illegitimate, but textually legitimate? Would the standard of text and function permit or exclude this counterplan? Permit or exclude this counterplan? Yeah, it would permit it. Yeah, this would be allowed under textual and functional competition. Okay. Secret standard your lab leaders don't want you to know. So this is textual topicality. here are the premises of this standard. Competition and T are inseparable. You are allowed to like make a concession on topicality and apply it to competition, for example. So there isn't a division between the two. The standards that you use to govern competition should also govern topicality. Okay, premise 2. If your counterplan has to compete via text and function, don't your violations need to be both textual and functional too? The logic is the same. And if permutations are allowed to be functionally or textually legitimate, then the plan could be textually but not functionally topical. Conclusion is that plans are topical if they use resolutional words, even if their functions are completely unrelated to the resolution. The most clear-cut example of this is the first one, which is that you read the entire resolution, but you do not defend it. And you just read like a discourse advantage. Disease rep's good, talking about health insurance is good, but you do not defend the implementation of the plan text. That plan would be textually but not functionally topical. It would have no function that meets the resolution. And then there's also examples that are a little bit more ambiguous of plans that would be textually but not functionally topical, and those are based on omitting words from the resolution in a way that makes them functionally not topical or even functionally extra topical. So for example, striking through the word health in the resolution and then establishing national flood insurance. Do you think that this would be textually topical? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that is true. It would omit a word from the resolution. It's as of right now, I think it's kind of unsettled whether textual topicality requires you to have every word in the resolution in the plan. But it probably does. Yeah, I mean, that's the most obvious one. The other thing that you could do is you could add words to the resolution. Do you think that's textually extra topical? So the only example of a textually legitimate but not functionally topical, or textually topical but not functionally topical plan would be just reading the resolution and not defending it. That's possible. It's kind of unsettled what exactly this entails. Okay. We're going to talk about the case for textual competition alone. Okay. So if counterplans only have to compete via text, competition becomes so much cleaner and objective. It becomes very simple. How do you tell whether a permutation severs under textual competition? Yeah, correct. Just simple check. Is every word in the plain text in the counterplan or in the permutation? How do you check whether a permutation is textually intrinsic? Yeah, does it add a word? Does it add language that's not in the plan or the counterplan? It's very straightforward. It's very objective. And then if you have a critical or a linguistic angle, textual competition might be desirable. It does force you to choose the words in your plan carefully. It creates more language discipline on plan writing. Any other justifications for textual competition by itself that you all have heard of? Is there anything more to the case for textual competition? Okay. We're going to talk about the case against process counterplans. And this is what the AF wants to say. The AF wants to say process counter plans are bad for AF ground. The neg could pick a mechanism that is almost certain and almost immediate. Even if they are governed strictly by mandates competition. Here's an example. Point an ICBM at Congress until they do the plan. What do you think the AF is going to say? Say no? That becomes pretty untenable, right? The neg is allowed to create, through a combination of sticks and carrots, overwhelming incentives to do the plan. Another example that is permissible under the standard for probability schemes: do the plan if and only if the sun rises on November 4th, 2026. This is just the delay counter plan, but it's also technically uncertain. It is possible that the sun will not rise on November 4th, 2026. But is this like possible to answer substantively? Probably not. So process counter plans stack the deck. Other thing, process counter plans do not need to change very much from year to year. And this disincentivizes topic research. You all ever encountered the signing statements counterplan? Do you know what topic that was originally written for? Personhood, I believe. It then won a big debate on fiscal redistribution. It persevered on the college energy topic. And it was around during the labor topic too. How much do you think that file changed? It did not change. Yeah. Yeah, that is arguable. Yeah. I mean, I think that I agree with you. I'm with you there. This is actually the neg's argument for why Congress would prevail in the Supreme Court. That signing statements do not actually nullify the law. The law is still enforceable. Well, the AF's argument, yeah, I mean that the AF's argument is that it's not constitutionally permissible to view them as nullifying the law, and that's kind of the AF's argument. Yeah, I mean, you could say that the law is still enforceable in court, even if there's a signing statement. That seems to be true. Okay, questions about the AF case against process? When you are laying out this case, I think you should have a lot of examples of counterplans that are basically impossible to answer. Like that's a 1AR staple. Okay. AT process counterplans, good. The neg will say neg ground. We are debating the national health insurance topic. If you need signing statements to win debates, that's natural selection. Okay. The neg will say logic. This is one of the things that we outlined as the case for functional competition. The AF can say textual competition is logical. It's also kind of not logical to force an opportunity cost when any reasonable person could avoid the trade-off. Then I might say process education. But it is possible that your competition push, so especially if it's premised on textual and functional, is that, look, like all that our permutation allows is for the AF to apply the mechanism of the counterplan to something else. If you have a net benefit that is about the AF, then that permutation would not solve the net benefit. So it forces plan specificity. Okay. The neg wants to say process counterplans are good. Justifications. Neg ground. We two ends really like to complain about how hard it is to be neg. Do that here. Include your stock justifications like speech order and infinite prep, 2AR recency bias, and informational advantages. These counterplans also create functional limits because they narrow the topic to AFs with a certainty key warrant or an immediacy key warrant or say no. So you can say it shrinks the topic, and that's good. The standard becomes more persuasive if, I think if it's being deployed against affirmatives, maybe that are new, definitely affirmatives that say, that are like, a very small subset of care or subset of the American population and say that's topical. You can concede that claim and say, well, the only way to keep that topic manageable is a counterplan like this. And then education may be pertinent for health insurance. If the app's argument or the app's model of competition holds, then the app kind of just gets to fiat the utopia of single payer and not pay very much attention to implementation details. So process education could force more of attention to detail in areas like administrative law, for example. Okay, block recycling. Well, you have to do topic-specific research to compete. Verbs change every year. The app's impact to deficits will change every year, e.g., uncertainty in healthcare is bad, for example. Sometimes the terminology in the resolution changes so drastically that it's like a clean reset and the neg has to write their competition arguments from scratch. To some extent, this is inevitable, right? And the AF is also not like cooked by these counterplans. Say no, I think, is the strongest argument, given that there are just overwhelming political barriers to enacting single payer in the United States. And if you get really good at certainty key, then you've got something that answers every process counterplan, possibly. Okay. Table. Questions about this? Okay. 10-minute break. Come back at 11, let's say 35. Okay. Okay, so next thing that we are going to discuss, everyone, next thing we're going to talk about, hello, everyone, please. AF strategies. We're going to talk about what I think are the three main AF competition centered attacks against a process counter plan. These are like the three most common permutation centered paths to victory for the AF. So the first one is perm other issues. This is the textually legitimate but functionally intrinsic perm. If you are doing this in the 2AC, here is the template that you follow. Write the perm text, which should include the plan. You can copy and paste the entire plan text in there if you want, or you can just write plan as shorthand. Then copy and paste the next counter plan and start striking through words in a way that broadens its mandate or makes it more vague. On a topic like this, if the neg does not have a net benefit about health insurance, you might strike through the word health and say that it's applied to a different domain of insurance, like auto insurance or flooding, fire insurance. Um, most people do not think that you have to read this text out loud, but your text has to exist. Do you disagree?
I think it's
That you should have to? You should have to reread the text. Do you think that's true for like perm do both? Do you think that's true for like perm do the plan and the first plank of the counter plan? Do you have to reread the first plank? If you think that's not true, then you can't think it's true for a perm like this. Yeah.
I think that you don't have to read the perm text, but you have to specify. Like, you can't just say perm other issues because like perm do both, or perm do the plan and plan for one. It's like easy for the judge to determine what that means based on what they've already learned. But if you just say perm other issues without specifying the issue, the 1 AR's clarification of what the perm does is neat. You can also just like send out perm do both or like any other. There's no really you can just say that. Issues, there's no reason. You can just send out a bunch of
Okay. Yeah. Um, it is used as shorthand for the entirety of the plan text. So it's basically just like the plan is we're pretending that the plan has been pasted in. In the same way that you're allowed to say perm do both as shorthand for the text of the plan and the counter plan, and you don't have to like insert a formal text that contains both. Like we're all on the same page that just having shorthand for the term plan is acceptable. If you want to be safe, you could copy and paste in the entire plan. Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that that inserting the word plan is the word plan is just shorthand. That's not technically a part of the formal perm text. It's like, think of it as like an acronym, or I mean, even less than that. Like we're just understanding that you are inserting like the text of the plan. It's just shorthand. Okay. Does everyone understand the process for writing perm other issues? Okay. Other thing that I want to impress upon you all about this strategy, this perm is best coupled with a solvency deficit, even if the deficit is not particularly thorough, because the neg can and should have a reason that this permutation solves the net benefit a little bit less well than the counterplan alone. A lot of the time, this will be like related to vagueness. So for a counterplan that initiates a lawsuit over a controversy related to the plan, the neg could say that broadening the controversy to something that's like incredibly vague or broad would cause the suit to get tossed out. So you should extend a deficit if you were saying perm other issues. Okay, perm do the counterplan. This is the AF's second path. It argues the counterplan contains the entirety of the plan. The AF's angle, to be clear, is not that the counterplan is the most likely or normal way that the plan would be implemented. If you are going for perm do the counterplan, you are saying the plan contains a spectrum of possibilities. If one of those possibilities includes the counterplan, then do the counterplan is legitimate. The counterplan does not need to be the only or the most likely reading of the plan text. It only needs to be a permissible reading of the plan text. Otherwise, counterplan do the plan would become every 2 in R. This is, I think, strongest against a probability scheme counterplan, certainty or immediacy, something that likely fiats the plan and does not rely purely on downstream effect for solvency. Counterplans like this, consult the states or have a commission study the plan and then adopt the results. I think it is weak against mandates competition, anything with a decent claim to not directly fiat the plan. The neg should always say that competition should be determined by mandate, not effect. What is the traditional neg justification for this claim? Yeah. Yeah, any action could hypothetically culminate in the plan. So when you are going for perm do the counterplan, you can't go for do the counterplan because it results in the plan. You have to narrow your competition debating to the mandate of the counterplan. Advantage of this strategy, you do not have to think about anything other than perm do the counterplan. You don't have to worry about whether you solve the net benefit as well. You don't even have to write a text. It always solves the net benefit perfectly. So it's the most straightforward strategy. Okay, if the neg is answering perm do the counterplan, I think their strongest argument is that this makes the process counterplan a topical affirmative. If this is true, the AF could happen in 2050. It could contain a series of conditions under which it does not happen at all. And the AF could circumvent itself by hardwiring in a say no condition and then arguing that that say no condition is likely to be met. Okay, if you are going for perm due the counter plan, you could say competition is not the same thing as topicality. Competition tests opportunity cost. Topicality determines whether the AF is a permissible interpretation of the resolution. One example commonly cited for this is the delay counterplan. Most people in the community do not think that the delay counterplan should compete, but they also don't think that the AF should be allowed to be delayed until 2050. Those are two kind of contradictory beliefs held, one for T, one for competition, simultaneously. And then the AF can say that certainty and immediacy are default assumptions. The AF's argument is only that counterplans should not be able to compete off of these. This is not, the plan happens in 2050 does not have to be the most likely reading of the plain text, which means it doesn't need to be the version of the plain text that the neg is responsible for refuting. It only has to be a permissible one. Okay, do the counterplan, then the plan. I think this is an underexplored competition strategy. So do the entirety of the counterplans process. Do the plan after that, likely as a result of the counterplans process, presumably. Feature of this permutation, you have to win that the plan can be delayed. You know how I've been saying certainty and immediacy competition? Is this permutation immediate? No. Is it certain? Yes, it adopts the plan regardless of the outcome. It just does so after a process of delay. Okay, if you are neg and you are answering this permutation, there are a couple of problems. It's intrinsic. So the neg can argue that time frame is itself a function, or sequencing also is itself a function. And adding that degree of temporal separation, like that was not fiated by the plan, and that's not a function of the counterplan. That's new sequencing. So it's intrinsic. The neg can say that this permutation does not have a formal text. The neg could say delayed plans are bad, and to establish this, they should read a new definition that should, or maybe a term like establish, both require immediacy. If you're doing that, you're arguing that this permutation does what? Yeah. Severs, yes. You're calling this permutation severance. Last thing, if this permutation merely specifies the sequence of events, there's kind of no guarantee that the plan will happen with enough delay to solve the net benefit. So a counterplan that initiates a lawsuit over a controversy related to the plan, like compel Congress to do national health insurance, that will require probably, months of delay. There needs to be time for the case to wind its way up to SCOTUS. There needs to be time for oral argument. If the plan happens immediately after the process of the counterplan, then it could just moot the case and not solve the net benefit. So this is best for counterplans that require probably several months of delay to be effective to solve the net benefit. Okay. The AF should say, versus intrinsicness, sequencing is not a function. Even temporal separation is not a function. These specify how two mandates relate to one another. Sequencing is not itself a function. So it is not intrinsic. If the counterplan includes any element of sequencing, so for example, a lot of the time process counterplans will say step 1, 2, 3. The AF might get to co-opt that element and apply it to the plan. And if the plan can be delayed, you're merely specifying when the plan happens. It's a specification of the plan text, not an added function. If the neg says no formal text, boo. Do the counterplan, then the plan was the text. Perms don't all need formal texts. The utility of a formal text is to verify that a perm is textually legitimate, even if functionally intrinsic. But you're not arguing this perm is textually legitimate. You're only saying it's functionally legitimate. So that's not really necessary. To prevent the AF from changing the perm in the 1AR, the neg could ask questions about it. So cross-X checks. The neg could say delayed counterplans are bad, or delayed plans are bad, but delayed counterplans are worse. The neg will always come up with the reason that we shouldn't do the AF until 2 weeks from now, usually for political reasons. And then the AF specified the order of events, not the time frame of events. So the AF would not be allowed to say 2050. They would only be able to say which happens after the other. Okay, delayed plans versus counterplans. Which do we think is worse? Any opinions? Any thoughts? Which is worse? Yeah. You think delayed plans are worse? Yeah, so the case for delayed plans are worse are it's easier to find an AF with an immediacy key warrant than it is to find a 2050 politics DA. Yeah,
Counterplans are worse because there's basically, I mean, I disagree with the fact that apps can like very easily have an immediacy warrant, especially at the beginning of the season, because the midterms DA is like months away. There's no app that says you need to do sim repair within the next like 3 months. Then also it's like there's apps that are like delayed super far in the future also have less advocates for like we should do this in the future. So those apps like one of the
yeah. So the case for it's worse for these to exist on the neg are it is literally impossible to answer do the plan in 2 weeks. Against a DA as strong as midterms, delay is just nuclear. The AF also has to fill a 1EC. It has to beat generics like time agnostic generics. There probably won't be solvency advocates. And you have to write advantages that only make sense in 2050. Okay. The AF's path to victory is to make the debate about process counterplans are bad because AF ground and backfile recycling. This is your best justification for your model of competition or whatever perm you are deploying. Treat it like standards on topicality. Perm do the counterplan. Should means X. Should entails delay means uncertain. Prefer it because. Similarly, counterplans have to compete via text and function. Because process counterplans are bad. That is generally, if you were affirmative, your strongest justification for your model. In my opinion, process counterplans good is like among the weaker things in the next toolkit, and instead they should focus on the AF strategy. So the AF's normative justifications should be broader. They should be a little bit more generic. They should be a little bit more permutation agnostic. And the neg's line of attack should focus on the AF specific permutation. Does this all make sense? Okay. You know I love tables. Questions about this? Okay. I don't want you all to lose to if and only if. So here's how these counterplans work. The United States federal government should do X thing if and only if plan. X thing is something that is coming now and will cause extinction. The function of this counterplan is to ban X unless we do the plan. So we've got like a really delightful example here. Drill into the core of the earth if and only if we do the plan. So in order for this to be offense, you have to win that the thing that you prohibit is coming now and that the counterplan bans it unless we do the plan. That's how it's offense. Questions about if and only if? Okay. AF answers, you can say do the counterplan because the counterplan text should contain the entirety of the plan text. So let's look at this example here. That counterplan text contains every word in the plan. If you are neg and you want to defeat perm do the counterplan, you should swap out a word of the, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Swap out a word of the plan text that is inconsequential and like not important and doesn't really change its function. So maybe replace should with ought or any other synonym. Perm do the counterplan then automatically becomes severance because you've omitted a word from the plan. It's textually severance. If you are AF, find that useless synonym or the inconsequential synonym and then swap it out with the word that you used in your plan. Okay. Does that make sense? Perm do the counterplan should beat it. If it doesn't beat it, then swap out whatever arbitrary word that they have omitted with the word that is in your plan. So this is the textual and functional competition angle. You could also, if you wanted to, you could defend textual alone. The problem is that textual alone is very bad for the AF. Because then counterplans that do functionally the same thing, they just tweak language, compete. Okay, the functional competition angle is do the plan and don't X. So you can say ban X or do not X. Your argument in this case would be to argue, or your position is to argue that the true function of the counterplan is that ban, that adding an arbitrary plan-specific exemption to that ban is a function. So this perm includes all of the counterplan except that arbitrary exception. In other words, it narrows the mandate of the counterplan. It's counterplan minus, not counterplan plus. So it's not intrinsic. Yeah. Yeah. This is true. Yes. I for the cap K or for something like that. Yeah. That is true.
If you're conceding that adding an exception of its function, then you can go for like the cap K, say like abolish B, get rid of it all.
Right.
Not actually some snippets. Intrinsic.
Other thing, you also don't have to go for competition versus if and only if. Theory is a plausible path there. Okay. So advice for executing process on the neg. If you want to win over process skeptics on this topic, I think you will probably want a topic-specific solvency advocate. This is not the year to regurgitate back files. I don't think you can credibly argue that it's really, really, really hard to be neg on this topic. At least not against an affirmative that is big and is construing the topic to be big. Or against an AF that is a big change and is construing the topic to require the AF to make a very big change. If you're answering textual functional competition, you should provide, remember, you can beat perms on substance, not just theory. So doesn't solve the net benefit as well. Should pretty much always be in your block versus other issues. Okay, AF. Don't get tunnel vision on competition. Say no seems pretty plausible given the overwhelming barriers to carrying out single payer. Remember, this topic requires Congress to act and likely would require a veto-proof majority. So solvency is dicey if your AF is single payer. Tailor your blocks to this topic. This topic's pretty generous for the DAG. Okay, last thing I wanted to talk about is writing carve-out permutations. In other words, do the plan and then shrink the mandate of the counterplan to not prohibit the AF. So how many of you all have seen like the cap K 1NC? Eliminate the private sector and adopt an NHS, right? The one that's just a counterplan text. Okay. If you are saying permutation, do the AF and abolish all parts of the private sector except for the healthcare industry. That permutation, is it textually legitimate? No, it is functionally legitimate. Or is it? The AF's argument should be that you are taking the mandate of the counterplan and shrinking it. And shrinking it does not change its substance. It merely narrows its application. So this perm is counterplan minus, not counterplan plus. The neg's argument should be that this permutation is functionally intrinsic because the mandate of the counterplan is elimination. This permutation changes that mandate. It adds a new mandate of merely reducing the private sector or shrinking the private sector. And that is distinct. Does that make sense? Okay. That is generally your playbook. That permutation is sometimes called all other instances. I've also heard it called all of the ban except for the plan. Make sense? Okay, questions? Yeah. If you're AF, so you can say that it retains the mandate to eliminate. It just eliminates the private sector in everything else. So it's not intrinsic in that sense. You could say that narrowing the application of the counterplan is never intrinsic. The term eliminate should be interpreted as a broad spectrum of bans. Bans on private sector and X industry, bans on the private sector and Y industry. And the AF is allowed to disaggregate that broad ban into a series of discrete functions and then permute them. Yeah. Yes. And then again, also this permutation still eliminates. And then maybe have a normative justification as well for just this is bad, it's not a real opportunity cost. We should get some flexibility. Yes. Maybe. I mean, you can say other things. You can say that permutation still eliminates. So it's not intrinsic in the sense that it doesn't eliminate something. It still eliminates the private sector. It just does a narrower subset of the private sector. And then the AF could say that irrespective of the next definition, the next definition can definitely be true, but it should be interpreted as a broad spectrum of bans, discrete bans. So ban the private sector in energy, ban the private sector in finance, stuff like that. And the AF should be able to disaggregate that broad mandate and permute individual parts to test whether the counterplan is a true opportunity cost. That is kind of your normative justification. Yes. Yeah, so this is kind of the inverse of okay, so textual topicality says that, if counterplans only have to compete via text and function, then the plan only has to be topical via text and function. That's not an obvious extrapolation of textual topicality. I think it's equally plausible that the AF has to be both textually and functionally topical. However, if the neg is or if the AF is making this argument or the neg is making this argument, that creates problems because on this topic, really on any topic, almost no plan is textually topical. It almost certainly will omit a word from the resolution. So for example, the single pair plain text omits the word national. And that would make it not textually topical. So, but if either one of those is true, it favors the neg. Either the plan is not topical or you create a standard in which you only have to be one or the other, and then that's undesirable. So I've seen people, as like kind of a trick, concede textual and functional competition from the 2EC, say that applies to topicality, so the app has to be textually topical, and then and then say you omitted a word in your plain text, so you're not textually T. You all, by the way, like you should have a 1AR for that if you're going to say compete via text and function. Yes.
For textual competition, what do you think the best answers like for things?
So if you're defending textual alone, that's like that's the whole. Usually, if you're defending textual alone, that's the point, right? Like, I think you just have to say that those are good. Like, you should have a defense of every word in the plain text. Probably not. Like, not in reality. So if the plan were carried out and like, what if we conceptualize the plain text as like the title of the bill? That would still be evaluating the implementation of the plan. Like they would still have a net benefit based off of that. What else? Yeah.
Wait, but if you're what it is.
Well, this is part of the reason that textual topicality is a little silly. Nevertheless, you're still evaluating the text of the plan, not something. Maybe the actual answer is like framework doesn't take it out because you're still evaluating strictly the text of the plan. And framework only narrows the debate to that. But I guess if the AF's framework interp is hardwiring in functional competition by saying links have to be to the effects of the plan or something like that, then maybe. Yeah.
If the 2EC says on like the case in response to like lobbying back arguments that they get to fiat good faith implementation of the plan, the neg gets to feed off that.
My initial impression is no, because the AF's argument would be in that circumstance that, good faith implementation might not be the only permissible interpretation of the plain text. It's just the one that the AF should be able to weigh. That doesn't by itself mean that a counterplan that is not good faith competes, because that could still be a permissible interpretation of the plain text. So the AF is making a normative argument that the judge should evaluate like the most sweeping, durable implementation of the plan, not that that is the only way that the plan could happen, which generally is the threshold for a do the counterplan test. Other questions about competition? Don't assume that everyone knows what textual topicality is. Yeah. Yeah, hold on. There's 70 slides. Okay. So, premise of textual topicality. The rules that govern competition should also govern T. If counterplans have to compete via text and function, in other words, if an egg needs their counterplan to both be textually and functionally competitive, then the neg needs violations on topicality that are also textual and functional. But that means the plan could be textually but not functionally topical. In other words, like what's to stop the AF from just reading the resolution and then saying, oh, no, like we didn't defend that. Here's our discourse advantage. Talking about health insurance is good. Or we did a thought experiment and that was good. So in other words, they would not be defending the function of the resolution. They would only be defending its text. And the neg is saying this is an undesirable consequence of textual competition. Yeah. Well, maybe they could, but the neg would still get DAs. But and then I mean, the neg could say like frame. I don't know. The neg could make a topicality argument. Um, Under functional competition, the neg would be allowed to base their definition strictly on whether the AF defends the function of the resolution. But if textual competition governs topicality too, then the AF meets if they just said the words of the resolution. To me, it's kind of ambiguous, by the way, whether under textual topicality you are allowed to add words to the resolution. That could be textually extra topical, but would that be a voting issue? Like you would have to tailor your standards just to textual extra T, which would be weird. Like I'm not sure if there's an impact to it. Under textual competition, it's just more ground, right? More stuff for the neg to pick out of. Other questions? About competition? So the other thing that the neg can make textual topicality about as a standard is what I said before. The neg could argue that the AF should be both textually and functionally topical. The AF is not textually topical because there's a word in the resolution that isn't in the plan. This is not compatible with this standard on competition. It's basically an independent topicality argument. Yes. Um, yes. Yeah, I think likely, yeah. It's just kind of ambiguous what that entails. But if it's textually and functionally, then it's also ambiguous whether the plane has to be both textually and functionally topical or whether it gets to be just one or the other. And my initial leaning is towards the former, which is why I don't really agree with this as a standard for competition. Or like if this is true, you could call it a standard, which is if it's true, it makes the AF not topical. Yes. That's a really good question. In my opinion, not that much. Mostly because competition debates tend to center on models. Like, what would your model of competition look like if it were universalized? That's typically considered the least arbitrary, the most objective. But the neg is free to disagree with that premise. And if they do, then I think that they should have a reason that the judge should not think about competition strictly through models and maybe should confine their consideration to like in-round decisions or behavior. It's kind of the same reason that I don't think topicality automatically becomes more compelling simply because an AF is new. It might make the case for neg ground a little stronger. Yes. Why should the AF say it's about models? I mean, it probably is just like alternatives are arbitrary. Um, That is the traditional justification for why we should think about things in terms of models. It also might just become a lot more it's kind of unprincipled and arbitrary to say like, we should be allowed to do X, but we didn't do X, right? Like we should have to think through the consequences of deciding a debate in a particular way. Sometimes decisions do actually, like high profile decisions actually do have implications for other debates. So in some sense, you like actually are creating a model or steering debate towards that model. And then it also just becomes much muddier to determine whether like in-round abuse actually occurred. Like that's much more subjective. And it requires judges to like entertain hypotheticals like, you know, it's like, okay, the neg could have done X, but they didn't in this debate. But what if merely the option of doing a particular thing shifted the way that the AF responded to it? Like that just becomes a lot more ambiguous. It depends on hypotheticals. There's second order effects. Models is much cleaner, more objective. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear the last part. No, to the contrary, you only have to. In fact, this permutation is clearly not textually legitimate, so you only have to win function. I don't think you should try to win that this text is legit because you'll have to add the word then. So this is just a function only perm. Yeah. That's hard, but I think you could basically like it just because of 1AR time constraints, but you could package it as even if their model of competition is true, perm do the counterplan. Then you will have taken care of a lot of the things that answer perm to the counterplan, and you'll probably only have to answer like one additional standard. And that one additional standard will be if it's not a counterplan, it's an AF. You don't have to, but you should. Like you should list examples of the types of counterplans that are greenlit by the next model of competition and explain why they're hard to answer. That also, I think, is an important thing for the AF's path to victory. In any rebuttal, list examples of things that the next counterplan or the next model would authorize. But 1AR time constraints do make it like kind of impractical to extend a bunch of perms. Other questions about competition? Time for maybe one more. Okay, go to lunch.